Alright, today's topic is going to be the Fury Prot warrior spec, as it would apply to tanking. This spec has become kind of flavor of the month. I think it was first popularized, at least started to really get popular when Scarm, whose channel I highly recommend, made a video about Fury Prot tanking and demonstrated himself in high-level content like AQ40 and Nax with this spec. Reaching very high levels of success. He also did an interview with Tips Out, which helped push knowledge of the spec further, and eventually Asmongold picked it up and it started spreading to the masses. It's kind of the new hotness now, and I think that's led to a lot of people having some misconceptions about what it is and when it's good and when it's not. A lot of people are speccing Fury Prot prematurely because they're super hype about it and want to get involved in this cool new thing. So we're going to talk about it today, when it's good, when it's not, how to do it, and you can enjoy this footage of me smacking people around with Bone Reaver's Edge in the meantime. So what are the pros? The pros to the Fury Prot spec are that it has higher threat generation. For off tanks, this is pretty much all the time, since you are not really needing a shield most of the time when you're off tanking. You're going to be dual wielding, and you can kind of spec to dual wield as Fury, getting things like flurry and offhand specialization, and this is going to help you pump out more abilities to use, more heroic strikes into the boss, get more melee strikes, more crits. In general, it's just going to be all around better for off tanks for generating threat. When you're the main tank, I would say it's not universally better in all situations. I would say it's better when you've exceeded a certain threshold of gear that makes it appropriate for you to spec Fury Prot. And that has a lot to do with critical strike. We'll get more into that later. What are the cons to Fury Prot? Well, if you don't meet that gear threshold, you're going to have lower threat generation than a Deep Prot or Impale Prot spec, because you'll have bad flurry uptime, which is one of the big things that makes this spec good. You will ultimately be less flexible, in my opinion, because you won't have tactical mastery. So if a mob gets away from you, you can't like intercept, taunt, swap back immediately, shield block. You're dropping all your rage every single time you swap stances. This feels clunky to play, in my opinion, and it makes you a little bit less flexible in the ways in which you can react to situations. And one of the other cons is you will have lower mitigation if you're using threat gear, or if you're dual wielding. Go figure, not using a shield, you're going to be squishier. So you'll have lower overall mitigation, you're going to be taking more damage, which puts an increased tax on your healers. So one of the misconceptions is that you take way more damage. And I would say that because of what I just said, that is true, but it's not inherently true. As a baseline, you're getting all the mitigation talents that passively increase your mitigation, reduce the damage you're taking from the prot tree, as they're all in the first few tiers. You're getting shield spec, you're getting improved shield block, you're getting toughness for the increased armor, you'll have last stand, so you have a nice defensive cooldown. You're getting all the things that inherently make you tanky from the prot tree. The thing that actually makes you squishier, which you can control, and this is a point I want to highlight, is when you swap in pieces of threat gear or choose to dual wield on certain situations. And if dual wielding, you would definitely compensate with a greater stone shield potion to get your armor up, since you won't be using a shield. But you get to control how many pieces of threat gear you use in a fight, and you'll generate a feel for how tanky you are, what your healers can keep up with, what their mana pools can sustain. And there's an element of control over that, so you don't necessarily need to take that much damage. You can put on a shield and full mitigation gear and still take just as little damage as a full Deep Prot spec would. So really the question to ask is, when should you go Fury Prot and when is it not good to go Fury Prot? I would say it's actively gear when you don't have the gear. Sorry, it's actively bad when you don't have the gear for it. If you have all mitigation pieces and virtually no critical strike increases on your gear, very low agility, I don't think the Fury Prot is a good idea at all. You'll have extraordinarily low flurry uptime, and that is one of the things that makes Fury Prot good for threat gen. It's kind of the holy trinity of having the Defiance talent from protection, but also jumping over to Fury to get Enrage and Flurry. This trinity of things, when working in tandem with one another, drastically increases your threat generation and damage output. But that combination doesn't make sense unless you have the critical strike to support getting Flurry. I've heard numbers thrown around like 10 to 15% increased crit chance from gear. Really, you just need to get a feel for what that will be, but it's going to be very, very hard to get that pre-Blackwing layer. For dungeons, I would say not having tactical mastery kind of sucks. I think Deep Prot is just objectively better for dungeon content. When you have 15 zombies that you just pulled and 3 of them go to the healer and you can't stance to jump over there, grab them, pick them up, bring them back. You just feel slow, you feel clunky, you feel like you can't react as fluidly to situations. It's just not as good to play. Honestly, I don't love playing it at all. I think it's objectively mathematically better for generating threat, particularly on like raid encounters, boss fights, but it doesn't feel good to play in dungeons because of the lack of tactical mastery. If you have insufficient knowledge of the spec, you're not going to know how to swap pieces in and out. You'll not know when you can dual wield, when you can't. You won't know how to gear appropriately to strike that good sweet spot balance, and that can make it challenging until you work at it, fail a few times, and get the hang of what it is to play Fury Prot, and strike that balance for your healers so they can keep you up while you're still generating more threat than you would as Deep Prot. You're going to be at the mercy of your healers as well. If you're dropping mitigation pieces, you got to put your faith in them to keep you up, and they got to have the mana to support that. So again, that is all about striking a balance, and I would say that that's all kind of in the bad category of Fury Prot. On the plus side, going to the sunshiny side of Fury Prot, one good thing I would say about it is that it is the max threat spec for raid tanking. You really can't exceed the threat gen as a warrior of going Fury Prot and just unloading heroic strikes on a boss. For off tanking, I think it's just objectively better in all situations for generating off tank threat where you're not getting hit by the boss for that extra rage. If you're dual wielding, you have flurry spec'd, you're spamming heroic strike and getting the advantage of the bug that increases your chance to hit with your offhand when you have heroic strike queued, and maybe you have some points in the offhand specialization talent and fury. All that works together to make you a lot better at generating threat than just kind of standing there idly with your shield waiting for 6 melee swings until you can shield slam. I've been in that situation. It feels like you can never keep up with the DPS on threat. It's much better for off tanking if you go Fury Prot. And then if you got content on farm and your raid is just trying to clear stuff faster and faster, that's a point where I think all the tanks kind of swap over to Fury Prot to increase the threat ceiling so that your DPS can just go ham and you guys can clear the content faster. Now when I say DPS gear, threat gear, what do I mean? This is where daggers and plus dagger skill can be really, really good for spamming heroic strike over and over and over and over on those fights where you're going to have the rage to do so, like say Veilstraws. You definitely want the 9% hit, and then just from there a good blend of mitigation and threat gear is what you're aiming for. Your mitigation gear should be pieces that are decent for threat, in my opinion. So for example, you're not really looking for the Helm of Wrath, which is a big wad of mitigation stats, armor, and stamina. But then if you look at the tier 1 might gloves, a lot of strength and some hit percent, I would say those are actually pretty good for Fury Prot tanking. If you want some excellent options for threat pieces, the epitome of what I'm talking about is the Helm of Endless Rage and the Drake Talon Pauldrons from Blackwing Lair. These are just really good. The PvP gear is just a bunch of strength, armor, stamina, and crit. You really can't go wrong there. You're looking for high armor, high stamina, DPS stats, agility gets an honorable mention here. It's at least on par with strength because it gives a tank everything that they need. Dodge, armor, crit, really, really good stat. And then you want strength, crit, hit as your DPS stats. Remember that raw stats like strength and agility scale with the Zandalar buff we're getting in Phase 4, as well as Blessing of Kings if you're Alliance. And then I tend to always use DPS rings like Don Julio's Band and Master Dragon Slayers, because I feel like they round out your hit rating and make it easier to gear for those golden Blackwing Lair pieces later on. The rotation looks kind of similar, I would say, to Deep Prot tanking, in that you want Battle Shout up at all times. If you were Deep Prot, your Shield Slam is now Bloodthirst, and the same rule applies. You want to use it on cooldown and always have the rage for it. You also want to use Revenge on cooldown whenever possible and keep it on cooldown. It is still an excellent threat per rage ability, even if you have to use Shield Block to proc it. You want to keep that on cooldown as well. And then from there, you're really just spamming Heroic Strike. When you're stacking this much crit and strength, Heroic Strike spamming is better than Sunder Armor. It's honestly just really, really good, and the more Heroic Strikes you can dump into the boss, the better, especially if you're dual wielding. If it's a fight where you can dual wield and kind of abuse the bug where your offhand essentially doesn't miss at all if you have sufficient hit rating, if you have Heroic Strike queued, you're just going to get a ton of value from Heroic Strike spam, and it just, as your gear gets better and better, Heroic Strike pulls further and further ahead as a primary threat generating ability. And don't forget that any warrior in your guild can help apply those Sunder Armors. In our guild, the rule is that the first global on every boss is Sunder Armor from all the warriors, and then from there, all it takes is one DPS warrior using a global, or one of the off tanks that won't need to take the boss most likely, just refreshing that 5th stack. So this is a overall guide to Fury Prot. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments or reach out to me separately. Really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Thank you. Bye.